Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is Monday, July 23rd, 2018. My name is Jose Centeno Melendez, and I am interviewing Ramiro Rey Martinez for the Voces Oral History Project in Austin, Texas. Thank you for your time and for allowing us to interview you, Mr. Martinez. Just to make sure you understand, this interview will be housed at the Natalie Benson Latin American Collection. If there is something that you do not want to talk about, you do not have to. And if there is anything that you would like to talk about, emphasize, or add to our conversation, please do. I did have the opportunity of reading your memoir. It is a wonderfully crafted book. And given the time limitations of today, I'm sure that we will not have ample time to go over each and every single detail that you provide for the readers in the book. But we will make an attempt to just have a broad overview of your life. And I like to just, zone in on few key events throughout your lifetime that have, really perhaps shaped your experience as a Mexican American, as a Hispanic or Latino, and as a police officer, and as a Texas Ranger, and finally as a judge. So without further ado, we will start. So first, if we could just talk about your early years, could you talk a little bit about your family history from as far back as you believe is most relevant to understanding your own life trajectory?
Well, I like to brag that we were in Texas before Stephen F. Austin. Well, I'm not going to say Stephen F. Austin, but before Texas was Texas, because my ancestor Andres Martinez was born in El Paso in 1834. So that was even before the Texas Revolution, so to speak. But we have had deep roots. However, my ancestor moved to Mexico, and why, I do not know, but of course it was turbulent times back then. And my grandfather was born in Satebo, Chihuahua, and it was about 1875. And he and my grandmother immigrated to El Paso, and then from El Paso all the way to Kent County. But on the way, he stopped at different places. I had one uncle that was born in Mexico, Uncle Jesus. And then my Uncle Fred was born in 1903, I think, or 1901 in Kent County, Abilene, Texas. And my father was born in 1904 in Abilene, Texas. Well, it's a little town, Ty, outside of Abilene, because my granddaddy worked for the railroad. And he had a railroad crew. They handled the trestles and the maintenance of the train. And of course, at that time, they were laying tracks for. And later, he left working for the trains, and he started clearing land because there was a lot of mesquite pastures out there. And so he had crews that would clear the land so it could turn into agriculture, for cotton production. So somehow he ended up in Kent County, Texas. That's godforsaken country, so to speak. And I'm glad to be from there, not live there. But God bless those people that are still there, hang around there. But anyway, that was where my grandfather put his roots. And he raised 12 boys. There was 9 boys and 3 girls. So that was the family. My daddy was the 3rd oldest, and he was the first one to get married. And he married my mother, who was from Durango, Mexico. She happened to be visiting her uncle, Jesus Macias, and that's where they met there in Kent County. And then, of course, later on, he went and courted her and got married in Durango. We lived in Kent County until my father and mother decided to move to Durango. He opened up a bicycle shop because at that time bicycles were a main means of transportation in Mexico, especially in Durango. And he sold bicycles, repaired bicycles, and rented bicycles because on Sundays they would rent all those bicycles. At the time when we went to Durango, I was 2 years of age. And then, of course, World War II came around, and because most of his bicycles were European bicycles. They liked those thin tires back in those days. And we could not get the bicycles. Plus, also, too, he had to come back because of the draft board, World War II. So I came back in 1943, because Daddy came first. And then in December of 43, I came to Fisher County, or Hobbs community. That's where Daddy started farming because he was 4F. He was illiterate and he couldn't, so the Army wouldn't take him, but he could be a farmer. And it was a change for me because I had started school in Mexico, and it was at a Catholic school. Now, it was kind of a secretive operation because the way the government worked in Mexico at the time, they were anti-church, but somehow or another we would get sneaked into they knew the classes were going on. And I went through kindergarten there in private school, and of course everything was in Spanish, as my brother and sister did. But then in 43, when we came to the United States, back home, I was enrolled in the school in Hobbs, and I didn't know English. So I had a big disadvantage because he was in January when I enrolled, and I wasn't acclimated to the cold winters because it used to be kind of semi-tropical down there in Durango. And so I missed a lot of school, and I was retained in the first grade, which I can understand. But that really burned me up because I didn't like the feeling that I was a failure. So I made it a point from then on to really try to be the best and excel in school. And I did pretty good. When I graduated from high school in Rotan, I graduated with on the Honor Society. I was in the Honor Society the last 2 years. So I was real happy with that.
Nice. So you moved a lot from your childhood. Can you talk about
It's not. We just moved to Mexico once, and then coming back, then we did move because my daddy was a sharecropper, and so we farmed different lands, and so we moved around in the general area, but we stayed in the same schools. We might change schools from Hobbs to Rotan or vice versa, but we stayed around pretty much.
Okay.
But one thing I have to say, coming back from Durango to Eagle Pass, we came on a train, and back in those days, the trains had the portholes for the soldiers because they had about 2 or 3 soldiers in every passenger car to guard against bandidos, and you had those portholes so they could shoot out of. So that was an experience. I tell you what, every time we stopped at a town, pick up passengers, we always made sure that we bought some tortillas or tacos for the soldiers because we befriend them, so they take care of us.
Okay, very nice. Just for the record, what day and year were you born in?
I was born in 1937, January 20th of 1937.
Okay. So at the age of 2, you moved to Durango, Mexico.
Durango,
Your father has this bicycle shop,
right.
And then you moved back to Texas.
Right.
In 1943. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the differences outside of, or probably even part of the discussion would be like the schools. What sort of differences did you notice between your experiences in Durango, Mexico, and when you arrived in Hobbs, Texas?
Well, the experiences were, at home, first of all. In Mexico, in Durango, we lived in the city. We had running water, and we had facilities where when we moved to the farm, we didn't have anything. We had the outhouse and the water. It was a bucket of water that's where we drank from with a dipper. It's a community dipper, so to speak. That was one of the big changes, and of course the climate change. But not being bilingual at the time, it was a detriment to me because I could not communicate. And of course, they made fun of me because of my name, Ramiro. They could not pronounce it. They couldn't roll the R's or whatever, and they called me everything. And once in a while, we'd end up in fisticuffs. And so my brother decided to call me Ronnie, and that name stuck in the family, that they know me as Ronnie. But my real name is Ramiro. And it's kind of confusing because my profession, when I went to the state narcotics, they started calling me Ray. So I'm known by Ramiro, Ronnie, and Ray. So I always say AKA, also known as, but my real name is Ramiro. And I had difficulties when I was going to school because of my name. And like I said, this started some fights every once in a while.
Different names, same person. Who was unable to pronounce your name or unwilling to learn how to pronounce your name?
The Anglos, you know, they said, well, I mean, they're kids. I mean, you can understand when you're first, second grade, you know, you don't think about those things. And they used to tease me and call me the Romeo, Ramiro, and all those, you know. And so it was difficult. I took offense to that, so.
So this is in a classroom environment. So the classrooms are not segregated around that time period.
Back, well, there in Hobbs they were not because he was so small. Now, previous to that, I understand that some people wanted, Anglos wanted to have separate schools, but some of the Anglo friends of the family, like the Willinghams, they said, hell no, they're going to go to school, the same school. So we went to the same school. And one thing that was real sad back in those days is that the general Hispanic population around there, of course, they were farm workers, and they had this theory that a child didn't need to go anywhere beyond the 8th grade because they said, no van a aprender cómo cortar hierba con el asadón in high school. They're not going to be able to learn how to cut weeds with a hoe by going to high school because, you know, they were relegating themselves to farm work. And that was one good thing about my grandfather. He believed in education, and he pushed us and my grandmother, you know, to get educated. And I am so proud of my family because, like, for instance, out of this, I had a cousin that became a doctor. He was the first one to go to Notre Dame from Rotan, from my hometown. My brother became a banker. He got his degree. You know, another cousin became he's got his PhD in economics. He's an instructor. As a matter of fact, right now he's teaching in the summer in London. And so it was the education. And it was a distraction, I think, to me or my family because some of the Hispanics were jealous of us because we were achieving. And they would say, mira, los Martinez creen que son como los Americanos. Look at the Martinez, they think they're like the Anglos, you know, being too good, you know, getting educated. And so we were trying to coexist, so to speak, with both sides because we were getting it from both sides. One of the things is that really hurt me was that I had 5 uncles in World War II. One of them got the a Silver Star and a Bronze Star. Another one got Bronze Stars. And, you know, they went and fought in Germany or in Europe and in the Far East. And that when they came back from the war, they were refused services at a restaurant. Also, too, we could not get a haircut. No Mexicans got haircuts there in Rotan. I had 2 uncles that had gone to Barber College in San Antonio in the 1920s, Uncle Jesus and Uncle Fred. And so on Sundays, we would get together at one of their houses and have a haircut whenever we needed a haircut. They had a haircut session, so to speak, you know, family get together and haircut session.
It sounds like you had some pretty tough times from 2 different sides then, from this Mexican-American community and the Anglos as well. Can you just provide a brief overview of what your neighborhood was like? What do you remember? Any vivid imagery that comes to your mind? Just describe the landscape for me, because we are talking about West Texas here.
Yeah.
So this is very particular. So for folks who may not be privy to what West Texas looked like, especially at that time period, you know, how many folks were around Rotan? Was there a lot of farmland? Were there any black people living in this community in the mid-40s to 50s? How many Mexican Americans, how many Anglos, and so forth?
Okay, well, in Rotan itself, the population was about 3,500 people. I guess Hispanics would number maybe 400, 500. There were some blacks. I don't know how many, say 100 or so, but the restaurants there in their little town, they there was only one restaurant that would allow Mexicanos, Hispanics to come in. None of them would allow blacks. The blacks had to come in through the back to the kitchen, you know. And the blacks were completely segregated. There was no schools for them. They had to go to Hamblin. Well, they had a little school there for the elementary, black elementary, and then after that they had to go to Hamblin, which was 22 miles away, for high school. But they were completely segregated. Now, at least, like they used to say, if you're brown, hang around, you know. And so we were accepted in a lot of places. We had very good relationship with the Anglo community. However, you know, there was, you knew your boundaries where you could or couldn't go. Now, living on the farm, we were isolated out there. And so it was a lot of farmland, cotton, wheat, and we call it maize, it's sorghum, and cane. And so it was kind of, your neighbor was about a mile away or so, you know. And so sometimes, you know, the Mexicanos would come by, you know, to visit. We would always, that was one thing, you'd never let anybody go away hungry. You always invited them to stay over, let's have supper. You'd go over there and kill a chicken or two, and, you know, you'd have some chicken. But you still had this togetherness. I mean, you helped one another. It was something different.
Very nice. You mentioned you didn't speak any English when you came to Texas. Were you allowed or encouraged to speak any Spanish at school or anywhere outside of your home?
No, I was never encouraged or discouraged, you know, to speak either language. Of course, you tried not to speak Spanish because, you know, right away you would get some resentment from some people. So you just got along and talked in English. And besides, I wanted to be proficient in English, so I made it a point. We all spoke English at home. Of course, my mother never really learned English, but it was a difficulty. We tried to, but she just kind of refused. But that didn't set well with us that she wouldn't try. But we try to read, we try to do whatever we could in English, you know. Yeah.
Okay. And you also mentioned a couple of ethnic tensions that were prominent in your early years in West Texas. How do you think that shaped your outlook in life in any way, shape, or form?
Well, my granddaddy philosophy was almost like Avis Carter-Rental. We try harder. We're in second place, so we try harder. We want to be number one. And so that was kind of the attitude that he gave us, you know. So we always tried to excel. And I think we did excel in a long way. Like they say, the proof is in the pudding. And you can see, like, for instance, my brothers and sisters, we have been successful in taking their place, assimilating into the good USA and being a part of it, you know. We have done good.
Okay. Are there any other sort of hardships or even accomplishments or great, feelings or events that you'd like to share about regarding your early years in West Texas?
Well, it was just difficult, you know, and especially since my daddy was a sharecropper. And we had about a 7-year drought, and Daddy wasn't making any money whatsoever off the farm, you know, farming. And I worked at the grocery store. I worked before school hours and after school hours, and then on Saturdays I worked from 7 in the morning until 10 at night. And that money that I made at the grocery store was to pay for the groceries for my family. My brother got drafted during the Korean War. He was a senior in high school, but see, he had been a victim of being behind in school because when we were in Mexico, he missed all those years, so they had to promote him, and then he had to learn English too, and then he moved up. But when he graduated, in January of '53, he had enough credit hours to graduate, but he got drafted, and that really made some people mad, and because my brother was popular, and made some people mad in Rotan because there were other Anglo guys that were in their 20s and 21s, and they were not getting drafted. And here my brother was in high school, and they wouldn't let him finish until May. They drafted him and took him away. Well, he went to the Army. Now, he, back in those days in the Army, if you were helping your family, part of his pay he would give to, it was called an allotment. And the Army or the government would match that allotment and send it to the family. So that's how we kept their family going, because I was paying for the groceries by working at the store, and he was sending his allotment, you know. Even then, after he got out of the Army in '55, and then I graduated in '56, we came to Austin to go to the University of Texas. As well, he was already here going through school on the GI Bill, and so I came and joined him. And both of us, we worked over here at the state hospital. I was getting $169 a month, and he was getting $179 a month, plus his GI Bill, which was $125. We rented an apartment on 39th Street, not an apartment, but it was an old house, the top of an old house, for $48 a month. And so we were even sending money home, you know, to help the family. Whereas other people, you know, they were getting money from home, we were sending money home. And it was a tough road to hoe. My brother stayed with the university, but I finally said, to hell with it. I did go drop out of university and went to business college here, Nixon Clay, and then said I might as well get my Army service with. I had already been in the National Guard 3 years, so I joined the regular Army and left here.
Okay.
Now,
why University of Texas? How did you become, how were you introduced to UT Austin and Austin in general, and how were you able to navigate this space and find a job at the hospital and all that good stuff?
Well, my brother had enrolled here. I had a cousin that was enrolled here at the university. I had a friend from Rotan, Donald Lewis, that was enrolled at the university. So there was kind of an attraction to it, you know. And then Donald Lewis had worked at the state hospital, so he had gotten my brother in there. So I also got in there because back in those days, the state hospital at nighttime, it was mostly run by students because you could have a little time to study, you know, and then go to school in the mornings. And that's why I came to Texas University.
Okay.
And I wish nowadays they would have had community colleges like they have that I could have gone through first and then moved on up. But, you know, when I got out of the Army, I came here back to Austin, and I had a difficulty finding a job. That was very difficult because my name was Martinez. I applied at many places, and of course, I wasn't asked to come back. And I even went to, at that time, AT&T, or it was Southwestern Bell Telephone. I went over there and asked for an application. I wanted to be just a linesman, you know, get on the ground floor and move up. They wouldn't even give me an application. And then later on, I saw an advertisement in a newspaper, and it said high school graduate, you know, blah, blah, for code clerk at the insurance company. So I went to this employment agency. It was named Calhoun. Eileen Calhoun was the owner, and I told her that, you know, I filled out an application, and I told her what I was after, and she says, very good. She says, she made a phone call, and then she gave me a little card and says, introducing Mr. Martinez, you know, for the interview. And they sent me, and it was for farmers insurance. And so I went over there at the appointed time, walked in there, and I handed the card to the receptionist, and she says, "I'm sorry, but Miss so-and-so, who is in charge of interviewing, is at a business meeting, and so you're going to have to reschedule it." Okay. So I said, okay. So I called Eileen up, and I told her that, and she says, well, she said, it's been filled. It was already filled. Okay. So about a week later, I saw another advertisement on Calhoun, and it had the same qualifications needed, but it was a different title. You know? So I said, I qualify for that. So I called Eileen, and I said, Ms. Calhoun, I said, here's this article, just like I would like to apply for that. She says, it is the same position. Says, you understand? I said, yes, I understand, you know, that they didn't want me, you know. So anyway, so I had made application at the state, and they got me a job with the state health department working on the multi-lit. There was a printing press. And I said, well, at least I can learn here about the printing, you know, because he was a apprentice for multi-lit. And it was a huge machine that printed all. So I started working there, and with all the assembling all the pamphlets, all the information that the health department put out all over the state. And one of the guys that was working with me, he said, hey, you know, would you like to go to lunch with me? I said, sure. So we went, and he says, I want you to meet a friend of mine. So I went and met his friend, who was named Richard Gibbons, and I asked Richard, what are you doing? He says, well, I got out of the Air Force, and I'm going to start working, go to school with the Austin Police Academy. You know, I'm going to be a policeman. He says, why don't you apply? I said, or do they have openings? He says, well, they're supposed to have 17 new cadets, and they have 14 so far. They need 3 more. So he said, why don't you go and apply? Okay. So I did. I went to the police station, and I saw Pete Weaver, who was a lieutenant, and he gave me an application. He said, fill it up, boy, because we're going to be testing real soon. So I went overnight. It was a lengthy application. I filled it out, and I took it the next day, and then they sent me notice that there was going to be a test in the evening. And so I went, kind of cleaned up and looked kind of neat. And I went there, and oh my gosh, there were 79 people there to take the test. And they were all Anglos. I was the only Hispanic. Okay. And I said, I don't have a Chinaman's chance, you know, the old expression. And so I looked around, and I could see some of the guys. They were all dressed in suits, and they seemed like they knew every police officer that came around there. Hey, how you doing? You know, they'd talk big, and some of them were smoking cigars. And, you know, I said, well, not much of a chance, but I'll give it a shot. So anyway, I took the test. Well, Lord and behold, I get another notice to come back for a second test. And the second test, when I come back there was about 30. And it had been reduced to over half, you know. And again, some of those guys that knew everybody, you know, I said, well, at least I got through the first one. Well, I took the second test, and then I went to this 7-Eleven store, and this guy that was also taking the test said, hey, I saw you there taking the test. He said, I just got notice that I'm supposed to come in for an interview. There's 11 of us that are going to be interviewed. He says, I don't know about you if you're going to be selected or not, I mean, for the interview, but he said, I'm going to go there. I think I have a good chance because I'm pretty sure I'm in because I used to be a policeman, you know, and he had left. Well, I went. I got my notice. I was one of the 11. So I went before the interview board, and they kind of made a big circle, and it was all the brass from the police department. And they started asking me questions. And one of the things that really they were keen on is they would ask me, okay, Martinez, you arrest over here Juan Lopez. He's your same race as you are, and he's drunk. are you going to cut him loose, or are you going to give him a break, or are you going to put him in jail like you're supposed to? I said, well, I'm going to put him in jail just like I would an Anglo. I said, anybody else. Okay, but that was one of the things that they thought that I was going to show favoritism to somebody of Hispanic descent, And Lord and behold, I made it. I was one of the three, and the rest is history.
One of the three Hispanics?
No,
Latinos?
the three applicants.
Applicants, okay.
So I was the only Hispanic in the class of 17 of cadets. At the time, there was only one, there were two officers. There was about 250 police officers in Austin Police Department, and two of them were Hispanics, and I became the third Hispanic. Leonard Flores was a detective at the time, sergeant investigator. His brother Esau Flores was a patrolman, and then I became the third Hispanic there. Now they had about 10 to 12 black officers, but this is one thing that back in those days, in 1961, that the black officers were restricted to the east side. They were on foot patrol only. They were on 12th and Chicon and 11th and Rosewood. That's where the beer joints were, and that's where they walked. And they had one police unit to pick up their prisoners, That's what the blacks, they could not go anywhere else in town in police. And if the guy that was driving the car, if he stopped an Anglo, a white person for a traffic violation, he couldn't write him the ticket. He'd have to call the other officer to come over there and write the tickets. That's how it was back then. Me, I was put on the east side, which was east of the expressway, which was the blacks and the Hispanics, predominantly. And that's where I worked for about 2 years. And then eventually they put me in Unit 213, which was the west side. I think I was probably the first Hispanic to work on the west side, or Anglo area, so to speak. And then, of course, Johnny Vasquez had come in also, so there made us 4 of us. And he was very convenient because there was a Hispanic police officer on every shift, of the day. One in the morning, one in the evening, and one at night. And then Leonard was in CID, so you had your interpreters, and that was it. That was the whole enchilada.
Were you ever provided any explanation as to why you first were patrolling in the east side and then shifted over to the west side?
No, they never. It was just a given, that you were going to. And what used to gripe me mentally is that here I am in the capital of the state of Texas, and I am a patrolman, and I'm only patrolling on that side, but yet you have Congress Avenue that runs all the way to the Capitol, and to the west and to the east, on each side, all the streets are in Spanish because they are the rivers as they come in the state. And here they are, and I can't patrol out here. That was something that bugged me at those times. And then once in a while I would get a call that kind of irritated me a little bit, because they would say, okay, Unit 217, we have an officer that has a person that can't speak English. Okay. What do you need? He says, well, we need an officer that can speak Mexican. I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I don't speak Mexican. If you want somebody that can speak Spanish, I'll be glad to help you. But that's the way it was.
Well, what sort of interactions did you have? In your memoir, you mentioned that you have some, this theme of ethnic tensions arises with the Anglo community over and over again, it seems. But what about the Spanish-speaking community on the east side? You're saying that there weren't that many Latino officers at that point in time. You were just one of 3 until another member joined not so long after. So what kind of interactions did you have with the Spanish-speaking communities? Was there some sort of camaraderie, or, was there like some hesitation between the community members trusting you as a police, someone wearing a police uniform?
No, once they saw my name, well, if it wasn't the wintertime, if they saw my name on there, ¿Hablas español? Yeah, sí. And so, I didn't have any problems. Yeah, there were some of the old diehards, well, especially the criminal, but no, I got along real good, and they were glad to see me. Now, once in a while, again, I would arrest somebody and say, hey, mano, córtame, déjame ir, no, you're going to go, I didn't cut them loose, but no, there was some people were scared of the police, and they just couldn't get over it, But the majority of them, I got along fine with them.
Yeah. So that Spanish surname really does make a huge difference, it seems. Okay, great. You have a unique vantage point of having served in the police force during the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Were you ever present in any mobilization action or civil rights sort of activities, and what was that dynamic like for you?
We were lucky here in Austin because all over, Alabama and all those places, they were having all kinds of problem with the civil rights issues. Well, we had a little bit of here on the campus, but it was kind of low profile. The only thing I remember is we did have some people that had their thinking caps on, because we had the black activists at City Hall at one time. They were going to take over City Hall and what have you. And we decided we were not going to use force to remove them. We were going to let them sit there, lay there. And then if we had to move them, we were going to use stretchers from the National Guard. We were going to put the women on stretchers and had a blanket to cover them up, so that they couldn't be exposed, and carry them off. And we were just going to let them lie there on the street if they wanted to block, and then we were going to wash the street down at night, put the water, but we were not going to have a confrontation. And also, too, we would hide, or this was the plan, if you needed some personnel real quick, they'd be close by but not openly seen. They wouldn't be seen. They'd be hiding in an alley, not hiding, but, put them in an alley away from view. And then if you needed to move them and respond, you could move in. But really, we did not have the problems that other cities experienced. One thing that really burned me up is I remember I was at the police association playing dominoes. We had a meeting when a king, Reverend King, got killed, assassinated in Memphis. And one of the detectives says, hey, that SOB got it, and that turned me off. And how there was burning and looting in other cities. We had a councilwoman named Amma Long. She was an excellent lady. She immediately went out to the east side and calmed tensions down, and we had no problems.
Nice. And of course, you were already married by this point in time.
Oh, yes, yes.
What was that like? Kind of conversations did you have at home, knowing you're a police officer? And
she just let me do my work, and so we were married in '61. I got commissioned on my birthday on the 20th of January '61, and she became a teacher. 10 days later, started teaching in South Austin. So she went about her work, I went about my work, and she just never questioned me as to what was going on. I remember one time, it's in the book, we had a kind of a riot, and it was at Dora Miller Auditorium. It was a black auditorium out here on the east side. The traffic office who arranged for overtime assignments called me up and said, hey, we got an opening for Saturday night over here at Dora Miller Auditorium. He says, all the black officers have turned it down except Warren Jones. And Warren Jones, I liked him. He was a big guy, older guy. He says, Warren Jones is going to work, and says, we need somebody to help him out. I said, I'll be glad to have with old Warren Jones. So anyway, so I did. And anyway, it was Bobby Blue Bland who was playing that night. And Dora Miller was kind of small, and at the last count, we had about 1,100 people came in there, and they were bringing in coolers with beer and whatever you drink. And it got out of hand, and a fight broke out, and I went over there and arrested the guy, and because he was throwing metal chairs at me, and I hit him with my nightclub, and I brought him down. Anyway, he went down, and I handcuffed him, and then people started throwing whiskey bottles at us and chairs and what have you, so we had to barricade ourselves, and to make a long story short, they tore the place up inside, but we survived. I got beat up. I was kind of bloody when I came home, and my wife was scared, you know, because it was about 2 in the morning, but it wasn't my blood, it was from the others. And anyway, she was real scared. And but when the alarm clock went off that morning, because I had to go to work at 7 in the morning, it was on a Sunday morning, I couldn't move because I had gotten hit so many times. I was so sore. So she had to call in sick for me, you know. But that was one of the times that it bothered her quite a bit. But other than that, there was nothing until the tower incident. That's another story, you know.
Yeah. Before we get to the tower incident, did you have any colleagues or friends or mentors in the police force that helped you get acclimated to the police force and were sort of welcoming to you?
No, well, I can say one thing about my shift. When I started working as a police officer on a shift, I had an excellent lieutenant, Lieutenant Marion Lee, and then my sergeant was Roger Roundtree. And Lieutenant Lee was very nice. He was very fair, and he always treated me real nice, as well as the Sergeant Roundtree. The other officers, we became brothers, so to speak. I mean, because every 3 months when we'd change shifts, we would get off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We wouldn't have to come report back until 11 o'clock the following night. We would have a party that night, and I was included in it, you know. And so we were a cohesive unit, and they accepted me very well. And so I have to say, now that's not to say that somebody else in the police department probably couldn't stand beside of me or hated my guts, you know, but my shift was pretty tight. We did real good.
Well, let's. I'd love to keep all these conversations going, but you know, you have such a fulfilling life and so many events in your life that we just need to unfortunately keep going here. But let's talk a bit about your experience during the mass shooting that took place at the University of Texas when Charles J. Whitman, 24 or 25-year-old student at University of Texas, opened fire from the university's tower. We're now approaching the 52nd anniversary of what has been considered the deadliest shooting on a U.S. college campus until the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007. Take me back to that day. What were you doing when you heard about something happening, anything happening here?
You know, it's a sad thing now that I look back, because on that day, my wife and I had just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary, and I was at home. I was supposed to go to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was listening to the news at 12 o'clock. I turned the TV on and listened to the news, and then they handed a note to the anchorman and said there is a shooter on top of the tower, and so far I think we have 5 people that might have been gotten shot. Okay. Stay away from the university area, you know, and we'll keep you posted. He went on. A little while later, again, he stated the same thing. He says, there are 5 confirmed wounded people. They have been taken to Breckenridge Hospital. The shooting continues, and stay away from the university area. So I decided to call the police station. I said, hey, y'all need some help? And the telephone operator connected me with Lieutenant Thomas. And I said, Lieutenant, I said, y'all need some help? He says, yes. I said, where do you want me to report? Do you want me to come to the police station, or do you want me to go to the scene? He said, go to the university area and find an intersection that is not covered and direct traffic away from the campus. I said, okay, I'll do that. So I got on the phone and called my wife and I said, hey, honey, I said, there's a man shooting the people from the top of the tower, and I'm going over there, but don't worry. I said, I'm going to be working traffic. Okay, she says, be very careful. Okay. So I got dressed and I got in my little 54 Chevrolet. And you got to understand that back in those days, things were different. We did not have the communications that we have nowadays, police officers. I didn't have any contact whatsoever with the police department. I got in my little old 54 Chevrolet and I had to obey the traffic laws. I couldn't, because, I mean, it was just a 54 Chevrolet. I mean, so I had to abide with the traffic, and I made it all the way back to the campus. One thing that bothered me, that at Lamar and Barton Springs, I saw a lieutenant and a sergeant investigator turn south towards South Lamar, and I said, hey, the shooting is over there. Where in the hell are they going? Later on, I found out that the reason they were going that way, they were going to get the lieutenant's rifle, to come and shoot at. So, but then there around Riverside and Lamar, I pulled alongside a detective who was sergeant investigator with a forgery detail, and I rolled down the window and he rolled it down his. I said, what's happening? And he said, oh, there's a guy up there shooting, shooting at people, and I think he shot Bobby Seitz. I said, oh my goodness. I said, Bobby got shot back in '64 by a burglar and survived, but I said, poor Bobby, Well, he was mistaken. He wasn't him. He wasn't Bobby that got shot. But anyway, and he just seemed like, non-echelon, he could care less about what it was. That was for the uniformed people, I guess. So I sped up, and finally, when I got on 19th Street, I could look, and I could see all the intersections were covered by police officers, motorcycle people. And so I said, well, they don't need me up there. I think I'm going to go into the tower, or go see if I can assist, because I figured a long time had elapsed by then, and I figured, hey, somebody's going to be in there, an assault squad. So I parked my car behind St. Austin's church, and I ran across to the South Mall, and I looked down there at the Jefferson Davis statue was there, and I looked down there and there was some blood. I didn't know it at the time, but that's where Billy Speed, the police officer, had gotten killed. And he'd gotten shot. So I looked and I could see a wounded woman. She was pregnant and the guy was dead by her, and I could see other bodies around in the area. So I decided I'm going to run as fast as I can and get into the tower. And I ran by this woman, and I was zigzagging. And I don't know if the guy saw me or even shot at me. I don't know, because there was so much shooting going on. And because of the buildings, he was bouncing back and forth. And so you couldn't tell if he was incoming or outgoing, but there was just a lot of shooting going on. I made it to the west door and went in. I knew where the elevator was because 10 years previously I had been there when I first came to Austin, and also to about 6 years before, when I joined the police department, they took us up there on a tour so that we could see the city. So I knew where the elevators were. When I got to the elevator, there was a young man that said, he asked me for my identification. I told him who he was. At least that young man was doing something, I had also tried to use one of the phones there that I found, and I tried to call the police station to get an armored truck to get some of those people out. But when I dialed the first number, he was busy. So I discontinued and trying to make contact with the station. I got on the elevator and I pulled out my gun and I said a prayer, an act of contrition. As I was going up, when the elevator door opened, I was looking at a rifle that was pointed at me and a pistol, but the pistol belonged to Jerry Day, a police officer. He was in uniform, and there was the guy with the rifle was in civilian clothes, and I just assumed he was with another agency. I come out, and there was a DPS intelligence officer there in civilian clothes on the telephone trying to make communication. I knew him because I had seen him at the police station before. So I was shocked that there was no police assault squad. So I said, well, we got to secure this floor. So we started checking the offices, and we only found one office where people had barricaded themselves. They came out, they went out, and there was one man that came out. He had a pair of white women's shoes. They had blood on them, and he says, the SOB has killed my family. Give me your gun. I will go up there and take care of him. I said, no, sir, we'll take care of him for you. And so he tried to get my gun. So we wrestled, Jerry Day and I wrestled him to the elevator, and I pushed the button, I sent him down. Then looked at the steps that go up, and I could see bloody footprints. So I started walking up the steps, and this guy with the rifle says, where are you going? I said, I'm going up there to look for the sniper. And he says, you're not going by yourself. He says, I'm going with you. I said, we'll do it service style. We'll cover one another. I said, come on, friend. So we went. And then after we come to the first landing, I could see this little boy with his tongue protruding out. His eyes were bugging out. He was dead. And then there was another woman. There was a woman that she was dead. That was his aunt. And then there was a woman that was wounded. She was suffocating in her own blood. We had to turn her over. And at the end, there was a young man. He was about 18. He was wounded, but he was conscious, and he said he's out there. So we had to move him. And that's why I got blood on my shirt, because of moving the mother and then moving the young man. And then we continue going up and then to the left. And at the end of the stairway, he had a desk that was blocking it. And that's when the civilian, who was named Alan Crum, said, are we playing for keeps? And I said, you're damn right we are. He says, well, I guess you better deputize me. And that's when I found out that he was not law enforcement. So I said, consider yourself deputized. He smiled, and that was it. I was happy to have him along. We pushed the desk around, and we found the receptionist. She was dying behind the couch. I looked out. There was only, at that time, only one door out, and it had window panes on it, and it had a dolly popped against it. I looked out the window to the left. I could see debris around, but I couldn't see the sniper. So I pushed on the door until the dolly fell over. While I was doing that, a bullet came in through the top of the door on the left corner. I mean, because they were shooting from down below. I waited, and then I went out, and I looked to the right, and I couldn't see anybody. So then I went around the corner, and I looked all the way down, and I couldn't see anybody. So then I got the officer, I mean, not the officer, the civilian, Crum, and I said, now you point your rifle in that direction. If he comes around the corner, you shoot him, because I'm going to go that way and look for him. So I did. And before I got to the other corner, I happened to turn around, and I saw that Houston McCoy had a shotgun. It was a police officer. And I motioned to him to get down. He didn't understand. A couple of bullets hit above his head, and he understood then. Okay, he came to me, and I proceeded around. I worked my way up, and then I saw the sniper sitting in a sitting position with a M1 carbine pointing in the west direction. And I was afraid that the civilian had left, and he was aiming at him, so I opened fire. I opened up at body mass, and I know I hit him on the side because he came up with his rifle and tried to shoot me. He was trying, and I kept advancing, shooting, and calling at McCoy to shoot the shotgun. I emptied my gun in him, and McCoy had already shot him once and then shot him a second time. And I dropped my gun, I reached back there, grabbed the shotgun, and shot him one more time because he still had the carbine in his hand and he was moving. And that was it. Then I started waving the shotgun, saying, we got him, I got him, or whatever, and stopped shooting, but they couldn't hear below. They kept continuing shooting up. Alan Crum, the civilian, started waving the towel, and that's what got the shooting to stop. It helped, but they finally, somebody contact them and told them to stop shooting them. And I got out, and I was sent to the police station, and I met with the chief of police and the city councilman Hub Bachtel. And they wanted to know what happened. I told them what had happened. And then the chief told me, he says, I don't want you to talk to the press. I want you to don't go to your house, stay somewhere else tonight. We're going to have a press conference tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So I did that. I got my brother to, Lieutenant Lee took me to my brother's house. I spent the night there. The next morning I was for the press conference. And the chief of police told us, you will not say anything to the press. I will handle it. And he did. I mean, we were just there as decoys or whatever you want to call it, ornaments, because he wouldn't let us answer anything. He answered everything, his way. And so that was the end of it. Now, over the years, I was satisfied. I didn't question anybody about what happened that day. I went about my work. I was proud of my department. I complimented my department. We got the job done, and I went to work. Later on, I got promoted in November. I got promoted to sergeant investigator because I was already on the promotion list, and I was just waiting for an opening. One of the detectives resigned. He went to work for customs, so that created an opening. So I got promoted because I was number one on the list at the time. And I had been on the list when the tower shooting happened. But anyway.
Wait, if I may, what were you thinking? Like, what was going through your mind when you were approaching the tower, and what compelled you to go right to it that day of the incident?
Well, I was looking at all the dead people around out there and all the wounded, and the shooter had to be stopped. And there was only one way, it was confront him and take him out. But I thought there was going to be people already there because they almost had an hour, for them. And see, that's where I'm going to get into this on the critique that I gave you, is because I didn't question anything for years until they started. Some malcontents started saying that I had missed all my shots. That I had not hit him once, that it was McCoy that shot him with a shotgun, and I was alive because of him. Well, bull crap, if I had missed, I wouldn't be here, especially because I know. And the thing that hurts is that they're just trying to discredit me in a way. And I have researched this. There is documentation at the Austin History Center. There's documentation at the Texas Archives and at the Briscoe Center. All documentations that say that I shot him, not killed him, shot him, okay? Bullets hit him. But yet they're saying that I didn't hit him at all. My brother has researched it, and it is his contention that the reason why they're trying to discredit me, or even back then, let me back up. McCoy, a long time ago, he's the officer that had the shotgun, said that he was told to say Martinez got him because they wanted to use it for recruiting Hispanics in the police department.
Interesting.
And let me say, 66, 67, 68, they might have recruited one. But and there was nobody up there to tell him that to say that Martinez got him. See, because one of the officers, there were some officers that came up later, and after the shooting was done, and he had a handheld radio, and he was Unit 34, that was Harold Moe, and he was told by McCoy, Martinez got him, and he put it on the air. He says, Unit 34 headquarters, Martinez got him. We got that man, Martinez got him. So there was no supervisor up there to tell him. He didn't have any communication to tell him that Martinez done it, okay? But my brother's contention is there were approximately 100 officers there at the scene, everybody shooting up from a distance. Nobody thought about getting into the tower and confronting the sniper. Everybody wanted to shoot him from a distance. And so basically what he's saying is that the police department, especially the chief, did not want to admit that a little old Hispanic officer, one that showed up, took care of the problem. Well, there was 100 Anglos out there, and that looked bad. Also, too, it looked bad for him because he was if all the information had come out that day, he probably would have been fired. See, because that documentary that I showed you a while ago, it documents there, and McCoy, the first officer, was the officer that was dispatched to the tower. And he got there, he was dispatched 4 minutes before 12. And he got to the tower, he looked up, and he said this. He said, I saw Black Panthers out of every window with rifles. The revolution has started. He got in his car and took off. He went in his car and he found a student somewhere and talked to him. The student had a rifle. And so, but it was at his apartment, so he got him in his patrol car, went to the apartment, got the rifle, no ammunition. Then they had to go to a hardware store, buy ammunition. Then came back to the scene, put him on the location, tried to shoot him. They couldn't shoot him. So he left him and he went and found another student that had a rifle but no ammunition. Then he went again and bought some ammunition and came back. Almost 40 minutes elapsed from the time that he got there until he made a transmission to the police station and asking for an ambulance to pick up a wounded person. And the police department never checked on him. They sent him to a shooting in progress, and they never concerned about his welfare. What's going on? They could have said, what's your location? Well, I'm here at the tower. He says, why didn't he even say that there's those Black Panthers out there, so they can call the National Guard or somebody, but nothing. So it is very confusing. And so therefore, this shooting could have been completed in about 30 minutes if he had done his job. He had a shotgun, he had a pistol, he could have called for backup, and they together could have gone up there and taken care of this problem. In this documentary, towards the end, Houston McCoy, before he passed away, his daughter videotaped him, and it's part of the documentary. He says, shoulda, coulda, woulda. If I had only gone up there when I was there, Billy Speed, the police officer got killed, might still be alive as well as others. See, it's been bothering him, guilt trip, because he didn't go up there. And then he is the one that wants to take credit for all of it. And one, I have to back up, about when I say there were 5 other police officers that came later, when we got engaged up there in the shooting, they had come up. And one of them, from those 5, when they heard McCoy and I shooting Whitman, instead of going up to help us, in his report, he says they retreated to a defensive position. So, and he's the one that is saying, he's supposed to be the expert who didn't witness to say that I missed all my 6 shots because of the distance and because I was under stress. So basically, they have, over the last few years, they have tried to discredit me. And there's a book here at the, it was published here 2 years ago, saying that I miss all the shots. It's about the tower. And there again, people are saying it, but the truth shall come out, you know, and it's documented. It's documented. I have the documentation that's in these repositories, you know.
When you went inside the tower, you didn't see McCoy at all. Did you not see him until you were already up?
No, he wasn't there. He was somewhere over there getting people to shoot. They had to call him. They said to report to Chief Helmuton, who was the head of security of the campus, because Chief Helmuton had called the police station, and this on the radio, and said, send me those 5 officers and all officers here, and we'll take them through the tunnels, the service tunnels to the tower, so they can go up. Well, McCoy was one of them that came over there and reported, and he got led through the tunnels and up. See, so it's a sad thing that they didn't. If this had come out that day about all of this, what I just told you, the chief would have been fired. And actually, you're supposed to do a study of an incident like this. The department had to do a study so that you could find your strong points and your weak points and how you can rectify your weak points. But they didn't do that because he was afraid he'd get fired. And there was a power that be here at the time. They collectively, I think, suppressed any information getting out as to the real facts. And because I have the tapes, radio conversations and the telephone conversations for 96 minutes this incident happened. Nowadays, whenever any incident like this happens, the first thing they get is the 911 tapes, right? And they play them. Okay, back in those days, the news media here knew that those tapes existed. I mean, because the police department recorded all of this, but they never asked for them. I don't care if it was the first time this incident like this happened, but you know, a good reporter would ask, and they probably did ask, and probably were turned down back in those days, you know, because there was kind of control over dissemination of information that could be detrimental to the elected officials.
That's a lot that you just threw out there, and I was unaware of a lot of these things. So the first thing is, it sounds like there was some tension even within the police force, and some sort of folks prepared for a revolution to come with the Black Panthers?
That's what he said, you know.
Of these things that you would hear amongst other police officers around this time period?
Well, see, back in those days, there was the Black Panthers, you know, and they were in the news, like in Oakland, California, and Stockton, California. The Black Panthers, you know, they were very aggressive, and they had some shootouts with the police. I don't know where he concocted this, you know, but anyway, if he had said that on the radio, my God, call the National Guard out, you know, we're going to need y'all there here. But no, you know, that's so weird. For him to think that, I don't know why he had that mindset. I cannot fathom that. But, you know, it's sad that they didn't get this information out there. I mean, you do a report, like I said, to find your weakness and find your strengths. And not only that, so that other police departments can understand, you know, study it. And so they can take precautions for something that might arise in the future, you know.
And of course, you do mention in your memoir, this is before SWAT teams were even formed, right? So in a way, you were kind of formulating what a SWAT team would be doing during an emergency procedure like this.
Nowadays, there is a school there in San Marcos, police school. It's called ALERT. You know, that's for active shooter response. And they teach the officers that when there's a shooting in the school or something like that, that the first responder is supposed to go over there and try to make contact with the shooter and eliminate him. as long as there's shooting going on. And they use me as an example at the University of Texas that go up there and confront the shooter. Because, like I said, if he had been confronted earlier, we would have had less people wounded and probably less dead people, but they didn't. And, it gets me riled up when this things happen like this. I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something about it but
a piece of this conversation that we haven't really touched on too much has been your training. You were in the military you were in the Army for about 3 years.
Yeah.
So were you trained to handle these sort of situations?
Well, we were trained because I was a combat medic. We were supposed to train, and that's one thing that I felt bad because when I ran by that woman, I didn't stop and help because we were trained in the medics that when somebody's wounded, they holler for medic. And you can't turn him down. I don't care how far he is. You're the medic, and you got to go take care of him and get him out. We had what was called triage. You had several people that were wounded. Okay, the most critical one, you leave them alone. You get the ones that not quite, the ones that are expected to live, so to speak. The one that's not expected to live, you let him last because this way you can save more lives. But I ran by her. But I was doing my own triage. I wanted to get up there to get him or help get him to keep him from killing more people, And if I had stopped there, he probably would have drilled me, So, but anyway, yeah.
For how long were you expected to keep all of your information private, especially from the press?
We were never told anything, but he just the chief controlled everything. Let me tell you something. About 1967, I think it was, the chief called me into the office. And he had a letter in his hand. And he says, I got a letter here from the Sons of the American Revolution. He said, they want to present you a Medal of Valor at Madison Square Garden and before the news media. And he says, this has gone on too long. He said, I'm going to send them a letter that you cannot come because this is disruptive to your work. You've been taking too much time to go to different functions and you're becoming a disruption, And I said, Chief, I'm going to tell you something. I have not disrupted my friend. Any time that I have been invited to go somewhere else to an awards or something, I have not taken city time. I have arranged it with a fellow officer to cover for me with the approval of my supervisor. I said, so I have not disrupted this department at all. And I said, I have done my work. And I said, but you are the chief of police. You do whatever the hell you want to. And I walked out of there. And I guess he did. Later on, I happened to look awards and something in a book at the library. This was years later. And it says this was the first medal they were going to award, and it was never awarded, And but anyway, that I just forgot. But see, I don't know. It's I did my. What I feel comfortable in is that I know that I did my job. I went and did my job, and yet then they're trying to. What hurts is that these people that are trying to discredit me. I don't know. It just doesn't sit well.
Without naming folks, where did a lot of this discrediting sort of movement come from? Because you ended up being a national sensation. I've
Yeah.
read multiple accounts of, you go into award ceremonies
Yes.
from different organizations, anywhere from Hispanic people of South Texas to the Hispanic Society of the New York Police Department to
Yeah.
the Sons of the American Revolution from New York to the state of Texas. You went to El Paso at a parade. You were awarded, I don't know if it's medals or certificates or
Just
you were
blacks. Yeah.
your plaques
Yeah.
in Austin, Texas. You have a corrido after you're
Right.
in your honor, and there's even a Hollywood movie which
Yeah.
recognizing that they
Yeah.
did take the liberty of artistic
Yeah.
expression or what have you, it still is in your honor, so I from my reading of the UT Tower mass attack, or dare I even say terrorist attack. I don't know if that's something that you would consider that as a terrorist attack or not, which might be
Yeah.
a
Not
different.
terrorists, but anyway.
Okay, so you were definitely perceived by a broader community as a hero, right?
Right.
And you definitely are. So where is this pushback coming from? You don't have to name any names, but just.
I don't know. I think it's the mentality of 1966 mentality back in those days, about the Hispanics couldn't do it. I think that's where it's coming from. It's some of those people that still have that mentality. It's not nowadays people from nowadays. It's somebody from back then. That's where the push is coming from. Some of those people that just can't accept it, that this damn Mexican went up there and did it and made everybody look kind of bad. One thing that I told the chief of police when I told him about that deal, I said, I told him, I said, when I've been going to all of these places, I go there as a representative of our police department. I am proud of my police department, and I go over there and represent them. And I said, and I want to put them in the best light. And I don't go represent me. I go represent my department. And that's when I said, you can do whatever the hell you want, and I walked out of there. But I think it's just that segment from back then that they still won't let it die. Let me tell you something. Sometime, it was early this year, I read an article in the New York Times about this black retired sailor. He retired from the United States Navy. He was a veteran of World War II. He was about 96 or something, but he was in the New York Times. And it said that during World War II, he was aboard I think a destroyer. And it got hit by kamikazes. And back in those days, the blacks in the Navy were normally stewards, served the officers, and what have you. And this black steward, he went through fire and closed the hatch to the magazine because it was about to explode. And he saved the ship because where the magazine's located, it would have blown and it would have killed 270 something sailors there. There was already some dead ones there. And he saved the ship. The captain of the ship called him in to his office and he said, "You saved the ship." But he says, "I cannot put you up for a medal because we cannot have a black saving the ship of all these white people in here." He says, "But what I'm going to promise you," he says, "I'm not going to put that in the log that this happened. He says, I'm going to promise you that you will never have to go on a ship again during your Navy career. You can stay in the Navy." And the guy says, "Okay." And he served on shore for the rest of his years until he retired. But isn't that something? He couldn't even put him up for a medal because he didn't want the black guy to save the ship. And so I thought about it and I said, hey, here's this Mexican guy, he cannot save the city, But be it as it may,
There he was, there you were.
Mm-hmm.
Only just to give context to any future listeners, only a couple of yards away from the tower itself. Uh, all right, and not too long after this incident, you did decide to leave the police force. What led to this decision?
Okay, I left the police department not because of this. I left it because we were always having difficulty with pay for the police station now, police officers. Now, of course, Austin is one of the highest paid police departments in Texas, probably in the nation. But anyway, back in those days, we struggled a lot. And I did have some problems with the chief. It was, I think, in 1964 that we had shortage of personnel, and we were trying to get a pay raise, a decent pay raise. And he proposed $20 for a patrolman a month and $65 for a major. And it just so happened that he was in June of 1964. They were, I think it was the 30th or what, 20th anniversary of D-Day. Yeah, let's see, 44, 64, yeah, 20th anniversary of D-Day. And there was an article there about, I think it's General Gavin with Airborne. You know, the Airborne, they jumped the day before Normandy D-Day, and they were scattered all over. And he was gathering all the men, and the next thing you know, he had more officers than he had men. And he said, never were so few led by so many. And so I cut that article out. And then I got the roster of the police department, and I put the number, okay, one chief, assistant chief, and on down the line, and so many captains, and 23 lieutenants, and sergeants and whatever. And at the time, the sergeant investigators, the detectives were sergeant investigators, but they carried the rank of sergeant. So I put all of the sergeants and above, and they outnumbered the number of patrolmen that were out there patrolling on the streets, uniform patrolmen. So I put that little article, never were so few led by so many. And then I put $60 or $65 will get you more majors. $20 will not get you patrolmen. And I put it in a little, made a little paper, and I took it to the station that evening, 11 o'clock when we went to work, and took it over there and I passed it around. The guys laughed, they thought that was funny. And I went to work, got off at 7 o'clock the next morning. I went home, went to sleep, came back to work 11 o'clock that night, or through the 11 o'clock shift. And the chief was there. And boy, you could tell that he was mad because he turned red and his jaws would start popping. And I asked the guys that were coming off, says, what's the matter with the chief? He says, hang on. He says, hang on. He's mad. Okay. So we get the line up, and the chief gets up there, and he says, there's an idiot in this department. And then he pulls out my little paper. He says, some idiot did this. Look at here. He says, we have 22 lieutenants, not 23 lieutenants. And I raised up my hand. I said, Chief, may I speak, sir? He says, yeah, stand up. Okay, I stood up. Chief, I just want to tell you that I did that, but that was just in jest. I mean, that was fun. The guys thought it was funny, and I did that. So you don't have to chastise all these other people. He says, come here. I said, oh, shit, here I go. So I walked up. Oops, excuse me. I went up there, and he stuck out. He said, let me shake your hand because you had the guts to stand up after I had called you an idiot. And he shook my hand, and that was it. And then Gene Bloomstrom, one of my fellow officers, he raised his hand and says, yes, Gene. He says, Chief, I was the one that put it up on the bulletin board. Okay, Gene. And he walked out. And then old Gene tells me, he says, when he didn't fire you, he said, I figured that I might as well own up to it. And we just laughed and laughed. But see, he wasn't happy with me there. Because...
so you were known to bring up these conversations then, huh?
I guess. And I showed you that picture of me shooting at those guys, that magazine article.
Yes.
Okay. I chased these murderers out on the Lockhart Highway. And of course, it was raining, and I was going over 100 miles an hour, and I was told to discontinue the chase. But they wrecked, and they were captured. Okay, murderers. They had just killed Mr. Delgado over here on 39th Street, and they had killed 3 in San Antonio. Anyway, that morning when I was getting off, Lieutenant Wilkes at the time said, "Martinez, I want you to stay right here because we got the Austin Jim Barry from the newspaper and a photographer coming over here, and they're going to question you about this deal last night, and they want that information, and you do whatever they want, you give it to them." Okay, yes, sir. So I stayed there, and they came and they questioned me. Okay, how did you do it? Can you post with a gun? You know, yeah, okay, boom. All right. Well, at that time, the newspaper had two papers, one in the morning and one in the evening. And so the evening paper, I woke up and, looked at the evening paper. There's my picture on the front page with a gun. Well, go to work at 11 o'clock that night, and there's the chief, mad as hell. And he says, "Come here." "Yes, sir." He says, "Look at this picture." He said, "You violated policy. You're not supposed to have your gun out, unless you're going to shoot, You never do that, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Chief, Lieutenant told me to do whatever the reporter and photographer wanted. That's not what he meant." I said, "Chief, it is not for me to question my supervisors what they mean, except to do what they tell me to do." "Well, that's not what he meant." "Well, okay, whatever." And then he gave us a lecture about how the Strategic Air Command has that glove with the lightning, and I don't know, it just went into it. All right. But anyway, so there was a little tension between us there.
Yeah, and it sounds like you also had you were already somewhat of a public figure even before the UT sniper incident.
Yeah.
Wow. So going back to you deciding to leave the police force.
Oh, okay.
What was that transition like?
Well, I had a friend. He had the Plantation restaurant. He was co-owner of the Plantation, and there was a picnic restaurant right down the street here. And I decided to get out because I wanted to make more money. And it was a mistake. I'll admit it was a mistake because I didn't have any experience in food business, and number two, I didn't know the problems with labor, the workers. So, needless to say, after I resigned from the police department, and the chief says, "Well, I just want to let you know that you always have a job here at the police department, but you have to start out as a patrolman." And I said, "I understand. I understand. If I leave, I lose my position. But anyway, you can come back as a patrolman." I said, "All right." And I left, and I went about 2 weeks after I had been in the business. I said, "This is not my cup of tea. This is not what I'm cut out." So I stayed with it for about 9 months, and then I started looking, and I made an application with the Department of Public Safety, Narcotics Division. And I was hired. Well, I wasn't hired. It was supposed to be September the 1st when I was going to be hired. I went and tested and what have you, and I made it. And, they accepted me, and I was supposed to start on September the 1st. However, they had to go into a special session because they didn't agree on the budget. So it was not until October the 1st that I was going to be going into the Department of Public Safety. And of course, this was early August, and so in the meantime, I wasn't doing anything. I had sold my part out, and I went to work hammering, doing some construction work. There was some apartments under construction. I said, "Hey, you need some help here?" "Sure." "Got a hammer?" "Yeah." So I hired out for 2 months until I could go to the state. And the chief, of course, said that I was bumming around, that I had, after I left the police department, that I bum around from job to job. He was kind of putting me down. But that was my bumming around. And so.
Were you still in contact with police officers and the chief
No,
during that
well,
period?
the chief's dead, but anyway.
I'm sorry, during that time period when you were
Yeah, I
fighting
was in
other
contact
jobs.
with officers. Yeah, the chief, no, I just ignored him. I just got out. No, but officers, I still was in contact with them. Yeah, we got along fine. But then, of course, I went with the state, DPS Narcotics, and I went to Houston, and I worked narcotics for 4 years. When I was there in narcotics, I got involved in kind of a shootout deal again, and I made history there in Houston because the district attorney's office has started a new concept where they had this particular squad that you commit an offense today and tomorrow you're going to be indicted. And anyway, we had this shootout, and there was a heroin addict dealer, and they filed on him for attempted murder on me, and also for having 8 ounces of heroin. And he was indicted by 10 o'clock in the morning. This happened in the evening before. And, it was a new project, and I was the first case to go for that. But when I was there in narcotics, I had Captain Eddie Oliver ask me. He says, "Hey, the commissioners want a Hispanic ranger, and we're looking for one that's a good one. If you have any recommendations, let us know." Okay, I said, "I sure will." And well, first of all, I'm sorry. Before he told me that, I had received a letter from Clint Peoples, who was the senior ranger captain, inviting me to come and take the test, compete for the ranger. And then when Eddie Oliver told me this, that the commissioners wanted a Hispanic officer, I said, "I'm not going to be a token. I'm going to do it on my own." So I wrote a letter to Captain Peoples and saying, "Thank you very much for the opportunity to compete in the test, but I'm still trying to eradicate the narcotic problem, for my daughters." Just kind of nice letter, And I sent it to him, and I didn't take the test. And well, Pedro Montemayor was appointed the ranger. He was a DA investigator out of Midland, and he was a good officer, good man. He was from San Benito, but anyway, he was a good man. He got appointed and sent to Laredo. Well, the following year, I decided, well, I'm going to try to get in the Rangers, and of course, they used to put an announcements out and that there was going to be testing for ranger position. So I decided I'd throw my hat in the ring. And sure enough, I tested and I made it to the interview board. And when I went to the interview board, there was Captain Peoples there in the front. And he said, "Well," he says, "I guess you eradicated all your drug problems over there because here you are trying to get in the Rangers." I said, "No, sir, I didn't eradicate it, but I'd like to be a Ranger." So anyway, I ended up on the eligibility list. I didn't make it because there wasn't enough promotions made that day. So I ended up on the list. The following year, again, I tried, and this time I made it. The second time I tried.
What year is this?
That was 73. I made it. I made the Rangers list. I made it, and I went to Laredo. When I made the Ranger, of course, there was an article in the newspaper about Chief Miles saying that the only reason I had made it was because of the tower incident and because I was a Mexican-American. And they wanted, well, that's the reason why I didn't take it back then. I competed for it. And it wasn't the commissioners wanted one, but it's because I made it on my own merits. And that's what I was proud of, and I made it.
I have 2 questions for you. Why the narcotic service?
Well, the narcotic service, I put in for intelligence, DPS intelligence. And I went and talked to Maurice Backham, who was the assistant chief of intelligence, and he told me, says, Ray, he said, we'd love to have you here, but I just want to tell you this. He says that we only have one opening for intelligence coming up this budget year, and there's going to be 15 for narcotics. And he says your chances would be better if you go into narcotics, because 15 versus 1. So I went to narcotics. And sure enough, because they asked for 30, 15 in September, and then they were going to 15 the following March. See, so there was it'd be a whole 30, but at least 15 in the first batch. And that's why I went with DPS narcotics.
Were you aware of the sort of dangers that you would encounter within the narcotic service?
It's not any more dangerous than anything else. I mean, it's you just got to take precautions. I mean, you just don't go throw caution to the wind. Everything is calculated. You're just going to have to be level-headed and know what you're doing. And what they were trying to do was the reason they were building up the narcotic service is because they did not have people that had been investigators before, but most of them were highway patrolmen, So they were getting some people from the outside also, that had investigative experience, because I had had 2.5 years of investigative experience with the theft detail and homicide there here in Austin, doing other investigations. So that's why they were hiring some from the outside, as they call it.
And this required you to move.
Yes, I went to Houston and lived in Houston for 4 years until I became a ranger. And then I went to Laredo. And of course, when I went to Laredo, man, they just welcomed me, and I had a beautiful time in Laredo. However, I wanted to get closer to family. So when the opening came up in New Braunfels, my wife's family is from Fredericksburg, and then my parents and other family was here in Austin, so it was close. So when that station opened, well, there was another little incident that happened. I was supposed to go to Seguin, but in Seguin, Captain told me, he says, go look at New Braunfels and look at Seguin and see which one you want, because the station was in Seguin, really. And so I went to New Braunfels and met with officers, and I went to Seguin and I met with officers, and I met with the sheriff. And the sheriff was, just peaches and cream. And he says, when you come over here, be sure to let me know so that I can help you find a good location for your house, that you're not in the flood zone, and I'll tell you who the best builders are, etc. And your wife shouldn't have any problem, because I have connections with the school district, and we can get her a job teaching and everything. I was ready. Well, come and find out, I wrote my letter. I said, I'm ready to go to Seguin. The captain approved it, and then the crap hit the fan, so to speak. The next thing I know is that the sheriff over there in Seguin said that I had not even talked to him, that I had come over there and that I was kind of snotty and whatever. I don't know. He was putting me down, and that the people in Seguin probably would not look too kindly for me as a ranger there, because my wife was from Fredericksburg, a German from Fredericksburg, and they wouldn't, biracial marriage, and they wouldn't look favorably on me and what have you. And I found out from the captain, he said, Captain told me, he says, what happened was that the ranger that was retiring there, and I thought he was a good friend of mine, had told the sheriff, he says, well, Martinez doesn't have to come here. He says, you can be the sheriff. I mean, you can be the ranger. All you got to do is let's go over there and talk to Senator Traeger, who was there, and he can pull the strings, and then you can become a ranger, and you can stay here, and Martinez can stay in Laredo. Well, they went to see Traeger, and Traeger told them to get the hell out of here. Says if I was to do this, I would not get reelected, and said tell Martinez that anytime he's around Seguin to come to my office, come and visit. And so the captain says, you're going to go to New Braunfels. And he said, the hell with them, you know. And see, even there.
Yeah, this is we just leaped a couple of years. This is after a long and fruitful career with the Texas Rangers. You know, playing some really important lead roles in various investigations in Laredo, and Crystal City, and Duval County. And even then, the topic of your ethnicity, your national background, and now even your in a relationship with a German woman from Fredericksburg ends up reappearing and reappearing.
Well, see, on the book there in the back, that letter from Captain Wood, you know, it's very complimentary, you know, and that's when on the transfer to New Braunfels. But, it was so funny, you know, when I was told the people in Laredo that I was moving to contemplating moving to New Braunfels. They said, "Oh no, you don't want to go there because they're going to discriminate against you. I mean, they're known." I said, "Look, I like challenges, but I'm going to go over there and find out." So I went to New Braunfels, and I fell in love with it and whatever. And I came back and I told them, I said, "Well, I'm moving to New Braunfels, but there's something bad about New Braunfels." They said, What is it?" I said, "They put sauerkraut in their menudo." Oh. They like to hug me. But no, you know, Maggie was telling me a while ago about the Rangers, the reputation that they had in Laredo or in South Texas. Yes, at one time it was pretty bad, you know, especially about in 1919, you know, World War I and that period of time and before. But really, I'll guarantee you, Rudy, the new Rangers had a lot to do with turning this around. Rudy Rodriguez and I were Rangers together there in Duval County. We investigated a lot, special investigations, and people became receptive to the Rangers. As a matter of fact, Captain Wood, when he retired, they threw a big pachanga there in San Diego in Duval County and honored him and gave him a plaque. Bruce Castile, who later became the senior ranger captain, he married a Mexicana from Raymondsville. Ruby. Another one, Ray Kaufman, he also became a senior ranger. He married a Mexicana from the Valley. Stan Guffey, a good friend of mine who got killed, he married Josie from the Valley. Dole Holdridge, who was stationed in Laredo after me, he married a Mexicana from the other side there. And so you can see that a lot of, I mean, it has changed, and you can see, I think that I am partially a role model because look at all the Hispanic Rangers that there are nowadays. As a matter of fact, one of them became a senior ranger captain, Antonio Leal, at one time. And then, you know, you never heard about this, but there was a black senior ranger. I mean, that was the head of the senior rangers, and he was from my hometown of Rotan. A black baby. When I left, you know, he was just a baby. And later on, you know, he became a senior ranger. You know, this is a different world nowadays.
Yeah, you do mention that in the book. So you're part of this new guard, this new emergence of
sort of, yes,
of you know, Latino or Hispanic or Mexican American, however you may identify, you know, Rangers. Did you have conversations with Ranger Rodriguez about how you would approach a community? Because you do mention in your book that you all were basically roommates for about 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Rudy had his problems too. He was from Floresville, but Rudy passed away about 3 years ago. He had Alzheimer's. But yeah, you know, we saw the problems that, but we overcame them. And you know, you always strive to do the best because you want to be a role model for the rest and all those young people that are coming up. I want to be a role model for them. I want to show them that we can achieve and we can be successful and we can take our part in this world, you know. I mean, we're justly justifiably so. We belong, and heck, we were here before some of the other people were here. And so this is my state, by golly.
Yeah. Do you know, like, do you recall any perceptions or things that were said uh, by members of the Spanish-speaking community about Texas Rangers? What kind of perceptions existed from maybe from the time you were, in Rotan to when you moved to Austin, or like in different stages of your life? What was your encounter with the Texas Rangers like? What kind of things did you hear, and what ultimately led to the decision to become part of this force and change it in many ways?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be a ranger because supposed to be the top, in law enforcement. So always striving to be the best. And so that's what kind of drove me. But I never had any bad experiences with the Rangers when I was growing up because Gene Graves was the ranger station in Sweetwater, which was handled Rotan. And I was impressed with him because he came over there and solved a burglary over in one day, at the grocery store where I was working. So I had a good impression of him, and I had a good impression of him. And of course, over the years, there were different things that happened down the line, and good or bad. I wasn't there, but I wanted to help bring the image of the Rangers up. I mean, as far as and like I said, right now we have a lot of Hispanic Rangers and Anglo Rangers that married Hispanics, and so that speaks well for the Rangers now. And when I did my investigations, Rudy and we did our investigations down in South Texas. We didn't look at the person, who he was or who it was. It was, did he do wrong? And we were there to clear the innocent as well as to convict the guilty. And so we were fair. And in Duval County, we got along fine. Even those people that we got indicted, when we went back for court or something, hey, vengan a la pachanga, get together, and abrazos. Even abrazos when people that we put in jail, And, that's the way the life was there. And so, hey, they did wrong, and they got caught, and they didn't blame us,
So you participated in the lead various investigations leading to indictments, of course, of even elected officials and state employees. Is there an event or series of events during your time as a Texas Ranger that stick out the most in your memory? Would you care to share a bit about them?
Well, I don't know. I guess Duval County investigation was a big deal that we managed to get remove so many people from public office and kind of get the Godfather, well, it wasn't just us, it was the federal government too, because of tax evasion. But we came in there and did the cleaning up of the rest, we got them. And I was real proud of, I was part of the investigation when Carrasco took all those hostages in Huntsville. And I was part of the investigative team that went in and learned how the guns were smuggled into the system, and the ammunition so that Federico Carrasco could take those hostages. 2 women got killed in it, in the 2 hostages. But
and this particular event, was that it happened at a jail, if I'm not mistaken?
At
the prison system, okay.
Yeah, in Huntsville in 1974. And they took the hostages in the library and they held them for, I don't know, almost 2 weeks before the big shootout. And like I said, 2 women died. But I was part of the team that investigated how the guns were smuggled into the system. So I was real proud of that we managed to get that. And well, like I said, Duval County investigation was the top deal as far as I was concerned in my Ranger career. There was a lot of other good little cases here and there, but that was it. That's the Duval County and then the Streets of Laredo investigation. That was another one. But yeah.
I mean, Laredo is like over 90% Latino, Hispanic, right? Did you have many run-ins with folks where they were like, hey, you're like Martinez, like... why don't you help me out kind of situations,
No,
or not really?
no, Laredo. We had I had a real good rapport there. Uh, it was tremendous. But my wife was teaching there in the third grade, and the principal of Nye Elementary said, Miss Martinez, he says, since you speak German, he says, we're going to have the first trilingual school here. And so my wife just put on a little deal, with the kids, about German, so they could speak English, German, and Spanish, And they had a little sausage festival. We bought some sausage and cheeses in Fredericksburg. And so Mr. Rodriguez, the principal, says, I have the only trilingual school in Texas. And so, it was a good rapport that we had over
So
there.
you're definitely an active member in a community
Oh, yeah.
as
Well, now that I have retired, of course, I've been very active there, especially there in New Braunfels, Honors Hall. I'm in Chamber of Commerce. I was inducted into the Hall of Honor there in the Chamber because I was on the board of directors. I've served as chair of different deals like retirees, military affairs. And so I've been active with the community. Like right now, I'm working, I volunteer at the St. Peter and Paul thrift store. I handle all the sports goods that come in that are donated. I clean them up, I price them, and I put them out, and that's one chore that I have. And then I'm active in the former Ranger Foundation and Association, and so I stay busy. I mean, you got to give back to the community. The community there in in New Braunfels has been great, and I am contributing as much as I can to it.
Did you develop any close bonds with other Texas Rangers? Do you have any mentors that you'd like to mention?
Not mentors. Well, my
friends?
Captain Wood, was my mentor, so to speak. He was my captain, and I greatly admired him. I thought the world of him. And in the police department, like I said, Marion Lee, Lieutenant Lee, he was great as far as I was concerned. He was a real good officer, a good leader. And Roger Roundtree, they all have passed away. The thing that is, I'm 81 years old, and I start talking about stories, and I start thinking, and I'm the last of the Mohicans, like at the tower. There's 4 of us up there on the top. I'm the last one still standing. The deal that I said about Huntsville, the investigative team, I'm the last one left. Duval County, there's only one other ranger left right now, and besides me. And so the walls are closing in, but I am so happy that I can be a credit to my granddaddy. This man came, he and my grandmother came from Durango, Mexico, Durango, Chihuahua, and in 1901, and settled out there. Can you imagine out there in the middle of nowhere? And as you can see in that picture there in the book about the family, before any of them got married, there was a 1930 picture, and they all in 3-piece suits, and they're farmers, and it was during the Depression. So you can tell that my granddaddy was a successful farmer or businessman, and his descendants, I'm so proud of his descendants, of which are my cousins, and my uncles, and then of course my cousins, that they have assimilated into this world here in the United States, and they are very successful. The majority of them are successful. I mean, yeah, there's some of them that that not going to achieve the heights of others, but as all in all, my granddaddy and grandmother are probably up there in heaven smiling, happy to see what they achieved. Because, my granddaddy, I wrote in the book, he had his poll tax. Back in those days, there was what was called poll tax, so he could vote. And my grandmother started getting her poll tax after women got the right to vote. And a cousin of mine has the copy of those poll taxes that she has preserved. And so, you know, they were real Americans. I mean, with the name of Martinez out there in Kent County, Texas, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and you do mention that your cousins, you have family members who have PhDs, you have decorated veterans in your family, you have, you know, doctors, and you yourself, you know, serving as a Texas Ranger. So how would you say that your experiences in this particular force, or even a police force, or throughout your entire career, how have these experiences shaped you? And conversely, what do you believe has been your role, especially as one of the few Latino voices in these institutional spaces?
Well, I don't know how to put it, but like I said, I hope that I am a role model that some kids down the line will look up and they say, hey, if he can do it, so can I. You know, I have spoke at different police Latino organizations like Amigos en Azul here in Austin, National Police Officers Association here in Austin, and also in Fort Worth and in Dallas. I've been a speaker, and I have also been asked to speak at like at Laredo Community College, and then Lone Star College in Houston. You know, they have different campuses. I have spoken over there. As a matter of fact, I was in Troy, Michigan last year at a assailants conference, and they gave me a big trophy, you know, and and I'm going to be speaking here in Austin in October. It's for psychiatrists, doctors. It's a convention that they're having here, and they asked me to come speak at their luncheon during their convention. And so, and I'm speaking at a function in San Antonio on the 31st of this month, well, in a couple of weeks, to their officers, you know, from Bexar County. And so, in essence, when I go up there and I speak, you know, sometimes I get some feedback from some of those officers, and they thank me for what I've done, especially to motivate them, you know. And that's what I want to do, is motivate the Hispanic officers, you know, to get up there and achieve success, you know, be successful. I want them to be role models themselves.
Yeah, and part of that is, you know, even documenting this road to success, which seems like it's important to you as well, through publishing your memoir. Can you talk about, you know, just listening to you speak and having read your book, I'm reminded of one instance where you mentioned in your book, and even earlier in the conversation, where you said that, you know, you had uncles who served in the war, decorated veterans, and they were never really in the picture when folks celebrated accomplishments by Americans, right? So it's like the history of Latinos kind of falls to the side, and there isn't much documentation there to support the experiences of Latinos.
It really burned me up because what's his name? Scott Burns or
Yes, Burns.
Burns. Anyway, he had the World War II, the history. It was very well done. I thought he did an excellent job, with one big glaring exception. He excluded the Hispanics that served in World War II. There were, I think, 14 or 15 of them that got the Congressional Medal of Honor. And yet, in the whole series, you don't see any Hispanics whatsoever, and they were right out there. And be surprised, like I had 5 uncles in World War II. And then I read obituaries out of the San Antonio paper, for instance, and there was some that were pilots in World War II. And you never see that. They were officers, pilots and flying airplanes. And you don't see that. You don't see that. What is the Hispanic population over here, the young people, are going to look at and say, my God, weren't there any of us, our people, heroes, or people that served? My God, what did we have? 250,000 Hispanics that served in World War II. And yet to be excluded, that's a sacrilege, I couldn't stand it. And I don't know, I'm just so proud of my uncles because, like I said, my Uncle Emilio got his Silver Stars in the Philippines. My Uncle Ben in New Guinea got the Bronze Star. And then my Uncle Jose, he was at the Battle of the Bulge. He was part of the relief that got in there and helped break the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, relieve the paratroopers. And my Uncle Rudy, he was in the Philippines too. And my Uncle Alexander was the only one that did not fight. And it's not because of him, not wanting to. He volunteered to go overseas, but they wouldn't because he was teaching. He was an instructor in flight engineers on B-24 bombers. And they kept him in Florida. He volunteered for overseas duty. We need you to train people. And that's what he did. My Uncle Ben went to New Guinea and he was trained by the Australians on how to be a jungle fighter. After he fought himself and got a lot of experience, then he came back to the States and he taught jungle fighting, before they sent him. So, they made a hellacious contribution. And then not to be acknowledged, that's terrible. And I run across them. They're getting far and few between nowadays because they're in their 90s. But like I said, I read the obituaries, and they were there. And I wish they had been recognized by Mr. Burns.
Yeah. One aspect of your life we haven't covered yet. You were a justice of the peace.
Yes, I served as a justice of the peace for 4 years, and I enjoyed it. And it was different because when I sat on the bench, I had to be very impartial. I had to listen to the evidence, and the evidence dictated my verdict, even if I had to go against an officer, because that's the way the evidence pointed and that's the way it was. But I was already used to it when I was a ranger, because when I went and did some investigations, people were accused of something, I investigated. If they had done something wrong, we made sure that they were punished as according to the law. But by the same token, if they were innocent, we made sure that we made it known that these people were falsely accused of something, and that we exonerated them. We wanted to exonerate, so it was something that I liked, the Rangers, because that's what we did.
So it prepared you in a way.
You bet.
Sounds good. Do you have any memorable experiences during your tenure as a judge that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, a lot of little funny things happen in being a judge. I'll never forget one time I had this lady, she was a psychiatrist, and the highway patrolman gave her a ticket for doing over 100 miles an hour at nighttime there in New Braunfels and Comal County. And she pled not guilty. She said because she had a justifiable excuse. She said a client of hers in Houston had called her and was contemplating committing suicide. So she was rushing to go over there to talk to her. And so actually she was trying to commit suicide herself, because by going 100 miles an hour at nighttime, That just didn't cut the mustard. Another one that I had was a UT student, got a ticket in Austin, got another ticket in San Marcos, and then he got a ticket in New Braunfels, and then he got a ticket in Edinburgh for speeding. And then he came to my court, and he had a slip of paper that he had gotten from a garage in, I remember McAllen or somewhere, attesting that his speedometer was defective. And I said, you didn't get the message after the second or the third? It's just defective. I said, well, and it was kind of a scam, the certificate. I said, it won't fly. So, it was funny.
So you dealt with a lot of traffic violations. And
yeah.
Sounds good. Okay. And I'm thinking back of when I mentioned that, you're part of this new guard for the Texas Rangers, but would you also consider yourself as part of this new guard for interracial marriage? Was there a lot of that when you grew up? Because you do mention that you married a German woman from Fredericksburg. Mm-hmm. Did you face many challenges with that at all once you got married?
Not really, thank goodness. There was, when I was getting married, there was some dissenters, so to speak, that didn't approve it. But, over the years, some of the people that were against us, they had turned over and they have become some of the best supporters. But yes, there was. You bet. There was some dissensions, And, but in general public, I didn't see it, it was kind of family deals. But no, I'm sure they just didn't let it be known, but there were some, You bet. Now my wife, let me say this, my wife she's a teacher. But here in Austin, back in those days, a teacher could not teach when they were pregnant. Once you became pregnant, you had to resign, okay? And you could not come back until the child was 1 year old. That was the policies back then. So anyway, my wife became pregnant. We had the twins, and she couldn't come back. So she went to work on the market. And she went to work for an employment agency. And when she received a call from a banker or whatever, looking for people, and she would say, Martinez, identify herself as Martinez. What? So her boss says, well, you're going to have to change your name because people don't want to talk to Martinez. So she started calling herself Betty Brown. Betty Brown? Okay, everything. Everything went fine.
Completely made up name.
Okay. And she used to be so mad because she says, well, I had this banker call today. They want some clerks, but they don't want any Mexicans. They don't want any blacks, and they don't want any ugly whites. They want good-looking girls that dress sharp. And, of course, they didn't pay much. And she said, oh, and what was so galling that one in particular that I knew, he was out here, he was a shaker and a maker in the community here in Austin, and he was for racial equality and all that. And he was one of those that was, don't send me any blacks, don't send me any Mexicans, And that's how it was.
You got to see a lot of these tensions emerge in various ways throughout your lifetime, it seems.
And when I was applying, I remember when I got out of the Army and I was trying to get on, I went to this, I think it was selling sewing machines. I'm not sure what it was. And the guy says, well, you know, I cannot have you going to doors, you know, knocking on doors, but I possibly can use you at the shop, you know, repairing. You know, I said, no, thank you. You know, repairing machines. I said, no. But, you know, because I was a Hispanic, no. I'm trying to think, no, that was, the only thing I can remember one thing is when I got on the police department, I was skinny. I barely made the 140-pound weight. And Mr. Joe Joseph shop down in Congress, he was the one that provided the uniforms for the police department. So we had to be measured, you know. And my pants were kind of baggy because the guy says, oh, hell, you're going to be eating donuts and you're going to get fat and you're going to fill them up. Okay. So I was walking on Congress Avenue. I had a walking beat. And all of a sudden, this guy comes in and he grabs my rear end. I mean, because my pants, you know, folded them together. And he says, son, well, he grabbed it like that. And I hit his hand, you know, with my nightstick, you know, like that. And he says, son, he says, I don't know what this department is coming to. You ain't got no ass at all. And I said, sir, I said, they're hiring people that think with their heads and not with their asses. And he says, hey, I like that answer. Let's go get some coffee. You know, but.
Yeah, I think that mentality allowed you to get real far in life.
Yeah, they just wanted big guys. You know, that's one thing I learned at the police department. Big guys usually got in trouble because they were offensive. You know, they go arrest somebody and they put the guy on the defense right away. You know, they're very offensive. Small guys like this, we used to head. What we used to do, we'd go over there and talk to them, converse with them, you know, before you know it, you had the handcuffs on them. And we never had a problem. I never had any problems with arresting people. But some of the big guys used to have to fight, you know, and arrest somebody because they'd come over there and, okay, partner.
So. I hear that. All right, Mr. Martinez, I only have one final question for you.
Okay.
And that has to do with your memoir. So, you know, obviously you were not able to cover each and every single minute detail during our history interview. But if you had to share one or two things that you wish you would have added in the memoir, what would they be? Have you thought about that at all?
Oh, yes. Now that I know what this malcontents are saying about me, I wish I could have gone into the tower incident more in detail, get the facts, and put all the documentation in there. Like I said, this is an afterthought, this critique that I wrote. I would have put it in there with documentation to back it up so that once and for all people can see it. I'm resigned to the fact that there are going to be people that are going to be saying it, attacking me, because it's a free country. They can say whatever they can. But like I said right there on the tower, it says the truth, you shall learn the truth and the truth shall set you free. I believe that. And in the long run, yeah, those malcontents are going to continue to try to discredit me, but the facts will speak for themselves, and that is the truth. And that's what I wish I could have put in there. I may rewrite the book. Well, I'm running out of years. I don't know. I hope the good Lord gives me another 10 years. I probably could rewrite the book and add that to it, you know. But no, that's something that I would put in there. I would go into detail because I was protecting my department, and in doing so, I neglected to put what really transpired.
Right. Are there any other things you'd like to add to the conversation that I might have missed or we might not have talked about?
Well, when I wrote this book, I kicked it around. It's a self-published book. And I possibly could have gone through the University of Texas Press or Texas A&M Press. Yeah, they're one and the same. And but the problem is that they have the right to edit and put in what they want in there, and they got the right to determine the title and et cetera. Well, they're the ones that are putting the money out, so I can understand that. And it's subject to review by this and different professors or whoever. And I did not want to embellish my book, because I have seen other people's books, they get embellished so much, because once you're a ranger, you know, some people kind of embellish things, and I wanted it to be the facts, nothing but the facts, and I wanted to have control of my book. The downside to publishing your own book is that you don't have the market, the resources to market your book. You have to get out there and market yourself and sell your book. And the University of Texas Press would have been able to, you know, open up a lot of doors for me. But yet it wouldn't be the book that I really wanted, I don't think. And this way I wrote this book, and I sold it myself, and I have sold close to 10,000 books. So I think that it's an accomplishment in itself, saying, I also wrote another book, and it's called Creating the Professional Texas Lawman, and it gives the history, it's an evolution of the history of law enforcement from 1900 to 2000, because a lot of officers don't know what existed before, like me, for instance, in 1960. I don't know anything that transpired before 1960, but after 1960 I knew everything about the law, you know. But it's the history of it, you know, how unprofessional the police officers were previous to this, because they didn't have the education, you know. And education is the key, education in law enforcement. And that's why we have better professionals now in law enforcement than we used to have. And
yeah, indeed. I mean, if you could look back, I mean, even the Texas Rangers themselves, their history and their origins really does come out of, you know, it's unfortunately it's not a good history in many ways, right? Like they were, but at the same time, it's important that you made really great contributions throughout your career, helped shape the Texas Rangers to become a better force, and you're in that process of documenting that yourself.
yeah, so because like my lieutenant, one of our instructors here at the Austin Police Department, when he was hired, he said, Chief Thorpe said, here boy, gave him a little book called The Rules of the Road. And he said, get in that corner over there and sit on that chair and read it. He says, well, he says, I read it in a couple of hours. And he says, now you know what's in that book? Yes, sir. He says, okay, go home and come back tomorrow, bring your gun, because we're going to get you a uniform. You're hired. And that was it. And then they put him to work.
Wow.
And that was it, because they put him with another guy, you know. And
just like that.
That's like that. That was their education. And that's why I said I was lucky when I joined the Austin Police Department, because at the time there was no academy. Well, the 5 major cities had academies, and Austin was one of them. And I had 800 hours of classroom hours before I got commissioned, put on the street, where across the street over there at the Sheriff's Department, 0 hours. You know, they put a badge on them and send them. So I had a good foundation there with the Austin Police Academy. I went through the 23rd. They started in 1946, right after World War II, because it was the veterans. They had some money, and that's when they started the academy here. And it was probably about 4 or 6 weeks back then, you know, but it was a start, where the poor souls elsewhere they did not have. It was not until September the 1st of 1970, before the state of Texas required by law that an officer had to have 120 hours of classroom before they got commissioned. That's 1970. So that's it.
All right, Mr. Martinez, or Ranger Ray, if I may.
That was whatever.
Thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's a pleasure interviewing you. And if you don't have anything else to add to the conversation?
No.
All right, then I think we'll just wrap it up there.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much again.